An interested viewer has asked, how can I circumvent my employer's policy of no firearms? I was recently almost assaulted in my company vehicle. Had the doors not been locked, I'm sure I would have been a victim. It was embarrassing how I felt afterward, not being able to defend myself properly. How do I handle this situation? But before we get into this, let me remind you, we have a gun giveaway going on right now. You can enter for free, but it ends really soon, so just click the link down below in the description to find out which brand new gun you could win. Tom, we can't in good conscience tell people to break the law. So when this viewer says, how can I circumvent my company policy and carry a gun when they tell me not to, I'm going to go with get a different job, work someplace else. But are there legal elements out there? I mean, in some states, these policies may carry the force of law. In some states, it's just, a suggestion and they're going to fire you. You're not going to go to jail. What are folks faced with when they're at a place that says, nope, you can't carry your gun?
Well, for starters, obviously, if you work in a school, the post office,
Yeah.
a courthouse, there's many just prohibited locations, which can vary by state, which will absolutely carry the force of law, regardless of whether or not an employee handbook explicitly says thou shall not carry here or not.
Yep.
Okay, so there's kind of that overarching. Here's what the laws are, regardless of whether or not your employer specifically enumerates or states can't do this, can do that, right? All right, so let's kind of set that to the side because that's just black and white. Can't deal with it, right? The next layer down from there is going to be our employer says we're not supposed to carry during our job, presumably on a job site, but carrying in and of itself is not illegal under the law. It's something that our employer can basically make as a job issue, but it sometimes can go more beyond that because you can sometimes get into liability issues. You can get into all sorts of different things, which maybe goes to why they're doing this. And I'm not saying that to defend them. I'm just saying trust me, you get a bunch of lawyers, a bunch of corporate attorneys into a room who will invariably give you the most cautious advice that anyone could possibly think of.
In good terms, you folks are there to protect the companies.
Oh, don't lump me in with those guys. All right, don't lump me in with those guys. But look, so you put your finger right on it before, which is, well, I always start anytime I'm looking at a legal situation of what's my backstop? In other words, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then at the front end, what's the best thing that can happen? And how do we kind of simultaneously explore one strategy that unites both goals of avoiding the worst and pursuing the best, right? I don't know what kind of situation this guy's in, of if this is his only job that he can do and it's the only company in town that does it. And by golly, he can't lose this job because that may shift their value hierarchy, right? Yeah. But again, we'll set those discussions to the side. One initial question is, do you have a position where people are going to be able to see or to discern whether or not you're carrying? In other words, if you're on an active job site, it's 100 degrees out in summer, you're physically bending over, you're doing all these sorts of things, it's probably going to be far more difficult to carry in that environment as opposed to if you're pretty sedentary at an office and everybody's wearing multiple layers of clothing, suits, jackets, that kind of stuff, right? Or if you have basically a super casual work environment where you can choose what you want to wear. And you don't have to have the tucked in shirt. You don't have to have all that kind of stuff, right? So I think that there's lots of kind of environmental factors, if you will, that can kind of play into it that can affect both your dress as well as what your activity level is, which will go towards what's the enforcement level. Also, I've taken calls from people in similar circumstances where maybe the rule's been promulgated, but it's been promulgated in a very, very wink, wink, nudge, nudge. No one follows this here, but hey, this is kind of what it is. At the end of the day, you're absolutely right. We and I can never tell someone to break the law, but I can let you know what happens if you do. So I'm not suggesting that in every circumstance, probably in most circumstances, employee handbooks are not law, right? Again, you work for the post office, something like that, different situation.
Then
That's
it's
law, right? Yeah. Right. You can't carry there. But otherwise, you have to be prepared to lose your job. You have to be prepared to be fired for cause. In other words, you're looking at possibly forfeiture of unemployment. You're talking about probably getting no or a bad reference in the future. So I don't know if you're in a position in your career where You can go to the other guy across town and you'll be totally fine or not. But those are kind of a framework of those questions. And from the legal scenario and the legal side of things that I would caution someone to think about. From the physically, how do I do it? Well, that's obviously going to be a discussion on the type of firearm, type of holster, type of clothing, activity level, all that kind of stuff.
So, statute of limitations, Wisconsin, like 7 years or so?
Six on most felonies, 3 on
okay.
misdemeanors.
So I can then clearly state that at a previous employer, I kept a gun at my desk in violation of company policy and maybe even prior to the Wisconsin concealed carry
Spicy.
laws. Yeah, it was, there were some incidents where I thought, you know what, I'm not going to be unarmed in this situation. And it was just that. It was keeping it completely concealed from everyone. I didn't even tell Tyler, and he didn't know. So keeping it completely concealed from everyone, because that's what concealed carry means.
Right.
And that firearm was there for more than 5 years in the just in case mode, because I had some true concerns that I didn't want to be unarmed, and I was willing to get fired. And I didn't think that, at the time it would have been a misdemeanor for carrying a concealed firearm in the state of Wisconsin. So it wasn't a felony. I would have rather been with that gun than without that gun in that situation. It's a very personal choice. And again, I cannot encourage anyone to break the law. I would tell people to follow the law, because at the end of the day, you don't want to get crossed up that way, but you also want to make sure that you are alive and can go home to your family.
And I think what you just embarked on is a very logical thought process of here's the consequences if I get caught. Can I live with those consequences? Or are they something that takes you out of the game? Right?
Yeah.
Felony conviction where I'm going to go to prison for at least 5 years. I'm not saying that your life is over, just jump off a bridge. Let me be clear. I'm not saying that. But that's also not the same as, I get fired and I go to the other job across town or whatever, right? Like these are two different stratas of consequences.
Yeah.
And that, again, to emphasize, am by no way suggesting that people should break the law. As an attorney, I can never say that. I am not suggesting that. Considering very healthy, having an introspective narrative about here's what can happen, here's the real consequences. Those are the sorts of things you need to be thinking about.
And I think it all starts with first knowing the laws. Understand what your local and state laws are when you start with this. So, want to know when it's legal to draw your gun? Click the video right next to me to reveal a detailed explanation from a former police officer and competitive shooter.
Let me give you a definition of lethal force. Lethal force is any force that would cause death or great bodily harm.